list the authors and address. In this part, we will learn how to list the authors and the address. The list of authors establishes the accountability as well credit. If you have some co-authors, problems about the authorship can range from trivial to the catastrophic. It is the easiest part of preparing a scientific paper is simply entering the balance, the authors, and address sometimes. However, there have been instances in which otherwise reasonable colleagues have become bitter enemies solely because they couldn't agree on whose names should be listed or in what order. So it is very, very important to list the author in correct order or suitable order. So what is the most important thing we need to know when arranging the list of the authors? In the past, there was a general tendency to list the head of the laboratory as an author, whether or not he or she actively participated in the research. Often, the head was placed last. As a result, the terminal spots seemed to be a clear prestige. So, a lot of persons think the last author is the important position. Thus, two authors, neither of whom was head of a laboratory or even necessarily a senior professor, would vie for the second spot. If there were 3 or more authors, the prestige-seeking author would want the first or last position, but not the one in between. So the first or the last position is the crucial position. There are some general rules for writing the list of authors. For the first author usually is the person who played the lead role in the research. That means the most part of the research or the papers was finished by the first author. Qualification to be listed first doesn't depend on rank. A graduate student or even an undergraduate may be listed first if he or she lead the research project. And even Nobel laureates are not to be listed first unless their contributions predominate. So remember, the first author, the qualification to be listed first do not depend on rank. Multi-authors may then to be listed appropriately in order of decreasing contribution to the work. That means contribute more, list ahead. In some fields, the head of the laboratory is still often listed last, in which case this position may contribute to command particular respect. However, the head should be included only if he or she indeed at least provided guidance. In general, all those listed as authors should have been involved enough to defend the paper or a substantial aspect. Some authors who didn't participate in the research should come to regret their inclusion when the reported research was found deficient or even fraudulent. So, if the person who haven't contributed any to the papers shouldn't be included in the author list. For the definition of the authorship, we always should know, perhaps we cannot define authorship by seeing the list of the author. Should include, only include those who actively contributed to the overall conceptualization, design, or execution of the research. No contribute, no list. Further, the authors should normally to be listed in the order of importance to the research. So remember the two parts, 2 points that will be important for list the author in correct position. Colleagues or supervisors haven't been involved in the paper. Can their name to be listed on the paper? Here is a question. What do you think? Can they? No, usually cannot. They should neither ask to have their name on the manuscript nor allow their names to be put on the manuscripts reporting research. So just remember, sometimes if the person have nothing to do with the paper, then you cannot have their name on the list. Another thing about the definition of the authorship we should also know. An author of a paper should be defined as one who takes intellectual responsibility for the research results being reported. However, this definition must be tempered by realizing that modern science in many fields is collaborative and multidisciplinary. So perhaps now there are a lot of authors in one paper. It's real. It may be unrealistic to assume that all authors can defend all aspects of a paper written by contributors from a variety of disciplines. Even so, its author should be held fully responsible for his or her choice of colleagues. So, for each author should be responsible for his contribution to the paper. Another thing, we have to admittedly deciding on authorship is not always easy. It is often incredibly difficult to analyze the intellectual input to a paper. Sometimes it's difficult. Certainly, those who have worked together intensely for months or years on a research problem might have difficulty in remembering who had the original research concept or whose brilliant idea was the key to the success of the experiment. That means the original idea was from who is not clear sometimes. So it's difficult to find the authorship, to define a definition of the authorship. And what do these colleagues do when everything suddenly falls into place as a result of a certain question by the traditional guy in the next lab, however, who have nothing whatever to do with the research? So sometimes it's very confused. Where is the idea come from? Maybe the guy in next lab? No, it's not. Perhaps not. Who knows? So sometimes we have to remember for each list author should have made an important contribution to the study being reported. And sometimes the authorship should list as soon as possible. Sometimes perhaps it's better, but it's not always. One important thing we should pay attention, referring to those aspects of study that produce new information. The concept that defines as original scientific paper. That's important. And the sequence of the authors on a published paper should be decided before the research is started. Sometimes, the earlier the better. Perhaps if you list very late who contributed the most, perhaps it's a puzzle. Also, a change may be required later, depending on which turn the research takes. But it is foolish to leave this important question of authorship to the very end of the research process. It's foolish to leave the important question of authorship to find the answer only when you prepare the paper. It's foolish. You can prepare, you can define the authorship as earlier as possible. In repeat, the scientific paper should list as authors only those who contribute substantially to the work. If they contribute nothing, then do not list them as authors. Sometimes, unjustified listing of multi-authors adversely affects the real investigators and can lead to bibliographic nightmares. Sometimes we should also specify contributions. Some journals require a list of which authors or authors did what. For example, who designed the research, who gathered the data, who analyzed the data in detail. Also about who wrote the paper. Some journals publish the list of contributors with the papers. Others just keep it for their own information. Sometimes, there are contributors who are not authors. For example, people who obtained some of the data but did not participate more broadly in the research, or who provided technical or other guidance. So, requiring this list of contributions can have at least two advantages. First, It helps ensure that everyone listed as an author deserved to be listed, and that no one who ought to be listed have been left out. Second, if the list is published, it can help readers determine which author to contact for which type of information. That make the contribution clear. We also should know that for the author's name, that should be in proper and consistent form. As for the name of authors, usually is designed as given name, middle initial, and surname. In general, scientific journals do not print degrees after author's name. However, some medical journals do list degrees, such as BS, MS, PhD, MD, after names. So you have to make sure it's correct. Contributors should consult the journal's instruction to authors or a recent issue regarding preferred usages. About listed address is not that difficult. The principle for listed addresses are simple but often violated. Therefore, authors cannot always be connected with the address. So it's also important to list the right addresses. With one author, one address is given, the name and address of the laboratory in which the work was done. If before publication, the author have moved to a different address, usually it happened. The new address should be indicated in a present address footnote. When two or more authors are listed, each in a different situation, the addresses should be listed in the same order as the authors. That means the address order should be the same as the authors. For the purpose of the address, it can help us help to identify the authors. Sometimes they have the same name, but if the address is different, perhaps it's different authors. It also indicates how to contact him or her. It's easier for the readers to find the contact information because scientists now communicate largely by email. An email address generally should be included at least for the author to whom inquiring about the paper should be convened. Some journals use asterisk, footnote, or the acknowledgement to identify this paper. The author should receive inquiries is called the corresponding author. Journals ask that a corresponding author be designated for each paper. The corresponding author typically submit the paper, receive the editor decision whether to publish. Submitter reverses works with the editor office after acceptance, for example, by answering questions from the manuscript editors or take page proofs and response to the inquiries from readers. Everything is included the job for the corresponding authors. So the corresponding author is important author. Usually, she or he know a lot about the paper. The last is an example for the author list. You guys can see you can see whether it's good or not for this kind of list. The first author is a senior graduate student who only made the fingers. The second author is also a graduate student in lab. He do nothing for the project, but he always actively join the meetings. And the third author, however, is the person who actually did the experiments, performed the analysis, wrote the whole papers. And do you think he will think what's put on third position is fair? As for the middle authors, like Nicholas, this one, the author name nobody will know. And also the second to the last author is like a postdoc who investigated the paper, or ambitious AP assistant professor sometimes put the second to the last author. Of course, the last author perhaps is the head of the laboratory, but sometimes he has nothing to do with the paper. However, he got the fundings, and his famous name will get the paper accepted. So, what do you think about this author list? Perhaps there's some problem. You have to make sure the author list is the right one. Sometimes the author list can give credit where credit is due. If you cannot list the author in proper position, perhaps your credit will be damaged. That's all for this part. Thank you for your attention.